Henri wasn't even a member of the specific group, to begin with. He was, after all, an accomplished undersea photographer. Nobody told Henri he couldn't or shouldn't do something when he had an idea, because when he wasn't playing lead saxophone for a Melbourne rock and roll band, it seemed the guy could do it all. Not even Jill Ratcliffe, his fiancée. Henri's plans to explore the ocean were much more exciting than simply dipping one's toes in the Australian beaches. Henri was planning on filming seals on a historic and isolated island off the coast of Victoria and spearfishing in the nearby waters. An ordinary person, Henri prepared with his crew to travel to Lady Julia Percy Island, a remote offshore volcanic island 22 kilometers from Port Fairy. 7 million years ago, during violent underwater explosions, it was formed. As the landmass split from Antarctica, it became isolated from the Australian continent. The island's surrounding ocean is between 30 and 50 meters deep, the sharp boulders on the break up enormous waves. Vertical cliffs, rocky cubs, shore platforms, and ancient sea caves containing marine life and enigmatic passageways could be found on the island's southwest corner. Interestingly, the most significant Australian fur seal breeding colony is on Lady Julia Percy's property. Additionally, uncommon seabirds can find habitat on the remote island even by Australian wildlife standards. But there's a natural enemy of fur seals wherever there are fur seals: the enormous white. Henri and his pals were unaware that this day would forever alter their lives. A professional shark fishing boat departed Moon River Wharf, carrying members of the Port Fairy Manta Skin Diving Club and the Victorian Aqua Club, to which Henri belonged. The director wore a black hooded bodysuit, which was not unusual back then. The two teams eventually reached Lady Julia Percy Island's beaches, where they were to start exploring and filming the seal colony. Percy Island. Henri and his pals Detmar Krupa and Fred Arndt parked the bow a few meters off Lady Julia's coast and were discussing a terrifying story. The usual crowd would only precisely discuss it after jumping into the water and exposing themselves to the whims of the waves. In the frightening story, an enormous great white shark was described as meandering through the neighborhood. Big Ben was the name of it. It was not difficult to believe in this monster story, despite most of them containing very little reality. One could see it as far as the senses could at this point, due to the thousands of fur seals. You can create the most monstrous creature if you put a guy on a boat in the middle of the ocean, close to a deserted island, even if only in one's mind. Locals, however, maintained that the enormous shark was genuine and that they had the scars to prove it. They said the shark was at least 20 feet long. But for Henri, this was just another fascinating prospect for his career. Around 12:45 p.m., Henri dove in and started swimming in the deep areas. Henri spent about an hour filming before returning to the boat at 1:15. Henri returned to the ocean after being dissatisfied with the first film roll. This time he had Dietra and Fred carrying abbreviated spears with him. Nobody could have foreseen that they would leave this dive permanently altered by the experiences. He was practicing a free descent. The trio came across a pack of seals playing in the surf. The bull seal among the harem caught Henri's attention, and he quickly turned to the camera. The powerful waves suddenly quieted down, and the seals turned around. The divers could sense something wasn't quite right, but they could not determine it because of the low vision and the murky water. They plunged. They hugged the seabed at a depth of 10 meters. However, they could not locate the seals and recognized they needed to ascend. Henri's head revealed as he broke through the surface, but a tremendous power struck him like a freight train. Before he could comprehend what was occurring, his head broke character at that exact moment. Henri raised his arms to alert the other divers to what had assaulted him. At the top of his lungs, he shouted. That was the more urgent issue. He was sinking Henri. He had been breathing heavily for roughly 45 seconds. He was suffocating as the enormous monster pulled at him and rolled him from side to side as the assault continued. Henri could recall the discussion he had about Big Ben on the ferry. He was overcome by panic and despair. The pulling and rolling then abruptly came to an end. There was a moment of calm for Henri. He broke through the water and swam towards the top, gasping for all the oxygen he could get. He felt around for his left limb, but it was gone. The shark ripped it apart. Henri was able to concentrate despite the overwhelming shock. Fred and Detmar got to Henri. He wasn't out of the woods yet, though, as the shark returned for more after getting a taste for Henri. The animal approached Henri once more, eager for another chop at the helpless filmmaker. But Detmar and Fred managed to repel the animal with their tiny hands. At least 5 times, the shark returned, and Detmar and Fred battled it off each time. The hand spears were bent in the struggle because the monster was steadfast in attacking Henry. The dive boat eventually accelerated toward the noise. After Jill seized the safety line, Henry was finally brought aboard. As Henry bled profusely, the other divers quickly brought him to the center and put a tourniquet on his wound. Henry got first aid on the boat right away. There were still people on the island, but Henry's situation was far more pressing. The captain proceeded to the infirmary and returned later to pick up the other island residents. The captain made an urgent request for assistance with a blood transfusion. When they got to Port Fairy, an ambulance with a small amount of blood was already there. Henry lost 3.5 liters of blood in the assault, the doctor said. He was hurried to Bull Hospital to alert. Two significant hypotheses emerged in response to the incident. First of all, according to DeMar, Henry petted a canine at the beach, and the dog's scent followed him onto the boat. He was causing the shark to strike. The alternative hypothesis was that Henry was donning a bodysuit with a yellow interior. Sharks are colorblind but highly conscious of contrasting objects, claim experts and two Australian universities. The yellow color markings on Henry's swimsuit would have stood out sharply in the murky waters off Lady Julia Percy Island that day, potentially catching the interest of a great white shark. Many contend the likelihood of being attacked is much lower than getting lost in the water. After all, visibility to rescuers is aided by bright hues. Henry was nonetheless brutally attacked. He was fortunate to be living, even though seals surrounded him. After a few weeks, Henry was back in the water and eventually wholly recovered. Part of the actual attack video and a reenactment was shown in his 1968 documentary Savage Shadow. Later, in an interview, no resentment was harbored by Henry toward the beast. Simply put, they were behaving in line with theirs. Henry was fortunate to be surrounded by a company of expert and trained divers. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more exciting content.